This is a discussion of world history, Chapter 1, Renaissance and Reformation. For your notes, this is discussion number 1. It is entitled The Emergence of Humanism and the Advancement of Trade in the Middle Ages into the Modern Era. As we're looking at coming out of the Dark Ages in Europe, we have to see kind of where we came from. Medieval reasoning concentrated muchly on religious beliefs and spirituality, as everyone was dependent on the church to pretty much tell them anything that was going on. The only people who had schooling, the only people who had education of any variety was the church and those that were educated by the church. However, as we get into the Renaissance or out of these Middle Ages, we start to see that people start thinking about what was the thinking going on before the emergence of the Christian church. We have a study of ancient Greek and Roman culture. There's also going to be an emphasis on the individual and what they can know and what their creativity is, instead of being completely dependent on what the church was going to give them for information. Also, with the idea of having lots more wealth available with the expansion of trade, there's going to be a lot more people who are able to dedicate themselves to learn more about the natural world, learn about cultures of humanity, instead of just living to get by. Now, on slide 2, we're looking at a map of what was the Roman Empire. And a lot of what we're going to see as the beginning of the Renaissance is from the leftovers of the Roman Empire. A lot of the state boundaries are left over from the Roman Empire. Its money system, because the church was a continuation of the Roman Empire in its organization, just not in statecraft. We also take a look at the map. We see that the Italian peninsula is extremely important because it's out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Pretty much anyone who wants to get anywhere from one side or the other to the Mediterranean Sea has to at least acknowledge Italy and the island of Sicily. Because of its central location, it became one of the premost areas for sailors to come, drop off their stuff, sell it, make their money, and sail back. And also, a town in Italy that we want to make sure that we notice is the city of Florence. Now, while Italy is the middle of the Mediterranean, Florence is in the middle of Italy. And because of that location, it's going to have a significant role in the Renaissance. Now, I wanted you to take a look at slide 3, where I show you how the items from the Far East, China, India, and these exotic places were actually able to make it into Europe. One of the routes that was typical is that they'd come out of the Indian Ocean up the Red Sea, and then they'd come up to the Sinai Peninsula. Then they would take the goods overland a short distance in Egypt to get to the Nile River, and then the Nile River would then take them right into Mediterranean, and then they'd sail probably to Italy, where most everything else was going. Now, we know now that the Suez Canal, which follows the Red Sea straight up to the Mediterranean, means they don't have to do the overland route anymore, but this route was used back in the Middle Ages going into what we're going to call the modern era. Of course, sometimes it was coming over by camel across the deserts of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, what we now call Iraq and Iran, which was Persia, and then they'd come through Jerusalem into the Mediterranean coast, and then they'd be sailed into Italy. And then the last map that we have on slide 5, we see that instead of going the water route across the Mediterranean, they'd be coming in, going through Asia Minor, what we now call Turkey, and then going into the Balkan Peninsula, following the line, and then coming into northern Italy, like we see on slide 5. Now, once it got to the Italian states, one of the things that the people who lived in Italy that were able to take advantage of this trading became extremely rich. We're going to see in the next couple chapters from now why people were looking for extremely dangerous ways to get to the Far East without having to go through all these different trade trade companies because it was extremely wealthy. This is the end of the discussion, number 1, for Renaissance and Reformation.